Michelle,
Daniel,
OG Rose. So today we're going to talk about an Anchor recording I made, a reflection after listening to a talk by Dr. Cadell Last, Alexander Bard, and Michel Bauwens. They were discussing commons in the internet age. That's not the exact title, but you can go and find it on Dr. Cadell Last YouTube channel, and please go and listen to it. It was very interesting. And there were many noteworthy points that stood out to me, but something in particular was when they were discussing the fact that today, in our day and age, there's not a lot of new frontiers.
Right.
Arguably, there might be no new frontiers because, we have satellites that can, map,
see everything.
Yeah, see everything. And, we know how many continents there are. We know you can look anything up on Google Maps, etc.
Right.
And so it's funny because as I was listening, it's just like this. It's almost like a voice in your head. I mean, I'm sure you understand this as like someone who writes creatively and etc. But it's just this line stood out to me in my head that there is no new frontier except the one in your backyard.
I like that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it just cropped up in my mind, and I just sort of took note of it and then kept listening.
Sure.
And so then I thought about it later on and wanted to do a little reflection on that idea,
right,
and what that might mean. What are the implications of that nuance? Because it's very true what Michel was saying, that it's very true. There is, in a way, there's no new frontiers.
Right.
At the same time, there is so much that is unexplored, even in one's own backyard. That's why I did the recording.
The record. Yeah. Well, I mean, talk about taking the kids to the forest and all the angles you see the barn at that you've never seen before. The idea that 10 minutes down the street are a ton of roads you've never gone down, or there are parts of the city you've never been to. It's like, don't you want to go see somewhere new? But there's a very real sense in which you never really even see where you live all your life because of all the different angles and places you can go. It's this really interesting situation where, it's like having a bunch of books. It's similar, I was thinking too, like if you have books in your house you haven't read, it's like you haven't seen those, and yet you don't even think about those. You just kind of forget about them sometimes. So it's interesting how it's true there are no new frontiers. And, on the idea of the global commons, many civilizations have formulated relative to a frontier that is yet to be explored. Like you get the frontier theory, and this kind of idea also that civilizations form saying, okay, well, they're beyond the frontier, so those are barbaric people or something. Those are people we're not going to go see because it's dangerous over there. Or other people would say, no, the unexplored frontier is exciting. You have this history of civilizations forming relative to a frontier, for good and for bad. Right.
Well, I mean, frontiers, you're right. You're exactly right, Daniel. And I mean, I think about frontiers, people, it's true. It's funny. There's this very exploratory, playful, curious, connotation with frontiers, right, and exploration. Yeah. But then there's also like fleeing persecution.
Yeah, exactly.
that then forces you to kind of go and find new land.
Frontiers, new places.
And I was thinking today, and I really probably would need to do a lot more, research on the topic. I'm sure people have. But it's funny because, you think about it as like this new explorers, but there were, at least sometimes, people already living there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So it's not like it's not in a way that it was uncharted as a landmass itself. It was uncharted to specific people.
Right.
It's like those, like that clothing store, that secondhand clothing store that's like new to you.
Right.
It's like that concept where it's like it's new to you.
Oh yeah.
Anyways,
so arguably there has never been frontiers.
Exactly. That's kind of what I was thinking about today too.
Right. It's like Marco Polo going into China is a frontier for Europe, but not for mankind.
Exactly. Which I think puts things into perspective a little bit, because in a way it's almost like there are no frontiers, and yet there's everything's a frontier. Like, because it's something I talk about in the talk is like there's actually there's like literally an eternity of things you have not actually seen yourself, like stepped in yourself, smelt yourself, things like that you haven't physically really experienced or seen. Rocks you have not overturned, etc. So there's there's this very interesting bothness to this. There's like I said, there's no new frontiers in a sense because humanity's existed. And then too, like if you just want to extend it to the animals, okay, let's just say they were just animals. Well, they were
they've
there.
Seen it, right? They've been there.
Which I know is different because they don't have.
Sure, but the point you're making is that the idea of there not being frontiers anymore is from almost kind of talking Western,
Exactly.
frankly, a Western perspective.
Or more of a colonializing.
Yeah, more colonial sort of reference point. In a sense, there's never been frontiers.
Exactly.
Maybe if you go all the way back to the first people coming across the strait, but you have to go very far back. But relative to us, there modern civilization, you could say, there has never been frontiers. So you're always talking from a certain reference point, a certain colonial reference point, which I think,
or just on, it could, definitely a colonial perspective, or also, when you go and take a vacation and you go, you go to Italy or something like that, then, why is that your frontier? Like, there are, in a way, frontiers. It's just we're thinking about it, like you said, a different perspective, different levels here.
Well, and I think that what's very interesting is the point you're making is to suggest that there's never been new frontiers so much as there have been new experiences.
Yeah.
And, maybe when people say, going to Italy will be a new experience, it's a new frontier for them. Now, I mean, again, in regard to the question of the commons, the frontier has always played a significant role in the formation of the society.
Right,
so,
exactly.
And even just a relative and conditional frontier can still have that effect.
Right.
Because you can define the us versus the other, and many civilizations have formed relative to that.
Yes.
The known and the unknown.
Yeah, and it's different if you're going on a vacation to Italy versus, conquering some land or develop, setting up some civilization in a new place or something like that.
Sure.
And I think too, with the sense of the commons and new frontiers are opportunities, right?
Yes.
They're like, they're often, opportunistic in a sense.
Yeah, new possibility.
Right, new possibility.
So to say we don't have frontier today could be societies don't have ready horizons for new possibility.
Well, and it's weird. It's almost like it almost can in a little bit more of an abstracted way feel like, okay, well, where's our hope?
Yes.
But see, I think that's why I wanted to do that short reflection in the anchor, because I think, just something funny to learn from foraging. If you go and see what types of what are the flora fauna around you. It's like, oh, actually, there's like spring onions here, and oh, there's actually wild blackberries here. There's actually a lot more than you realize that's just actually around you that you could even eat. You could even, whatever you can make teas from. Different things. I mean, this is simple stuff, but at the same time, it's actually pretty profound that like beneath your feet, there's actually resources right there.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess what I mean to say is, like, I think we have to sometimes bring that hope to our own locale. Like, understand that there's actually that hope there, right beneath our feet. So,
well, one of the issues is that, say, in the past, if you felt religiously persecuted, like a Huguenot or something like that, well, then you could get on a boat and go somewhere and be left alone. But you see, if today you feel, say, religiously persecuted by something, if you feel forced by the government to do something you want to do, or you feel scapegoated by the culture or something, well, you can't really escape.
Yeah, like where
anymore.
Can you go? Absolutely.
So there's a sense in which to talk about the loss of frontiers is to talk about the loss of the ability to run from these fundamental problems of human society. We can't run from them anymore.
And absolutely, and I think the internet is obviously it has a lot of pros to it, but I think that could be one of the potential downfalls is that there's, where do you go to not
I think it contributes, and I think in belonging, again, it's the idea that when you had frontiers, quote unquote, you always had a potential escape valve or ventilation shift. If the existential instability or pressure of the society was too much, you could always go somewhere and escape it. If you felt like the government was overstepping, or if you felt your religious liberties were being taken, or if you felt you were surrounded by racists or bigots or whoever, you could go somewhere. Well, now you don't have that ventilation system, if you will, like thinking of the frontier as a ventilation system.
In a absolutely
existential sense. And so you don't have that anymore. So then the existential pressure people feel is growing and growing and growing.
Right.
And what do we do about it?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think too, it was a in a way like a pacifistic move, right? Like you're going to a new place because you'd rather not stay there and
have to fight. Or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Now it's like it seems that it moves toward. Unfortunately,
no
like it's like what choice do people have but to potentially like if they want to break away, right? Like if enough people get together and they're like we just gonna have our own island, it's almost like, well, either you find that island, good luck, or you possibly fight. So it's an interesting dynamic, and I think that's, and in that sense that's very true, and that's why I think I did, I made the statement about how it is extremely true that there are new frontiers.
But at the same time, the point you're raising is extremely important, because if there's something about frontiers that is fundamental to human identity, then the point that there's never technically been real frontiers might be suggesting that what's really been a fundamental to the formation of the human being has been some kind of ability to have a certain kind of experience.
Yes, and then also like that sense of hope, like
yes.
which is odd. I mean, I guess for me personally, in thinking through this a little bit more, it's like freeing in a sense,
yes.
because you kind of realize like, oh, wait a second, like maybe we're not in some very new existential predicament, though I do think there are certain tensions that are new today because of certain things, but it's like it's not altogether so different from the past, when like we're saying, there actually to humanity there were no new frontiers.
That's right. So it's a certain quality of experience,
yeah, exactly,
that functions as the ventilation system to
yes.
existentially stabilize people.
Yes, exactly.
And it was in the past you could just escape.
Yes.
Now there is no, I guess I could call it, we could call it external ventilation system. So now we have to somehow develop an internal ventilation system. And that does seem to be tied to what you're describing about the ability to see the radical uniqueness and newness all around you. And in many talks we've done, and a lot of the work that we do, we describe the necessity of aesthetic being, of art, the ability to see beauty all around you, aesthetic epistemology, the ability to really be organized toward reality as a work of art, yes. as a work of beauty, and to be attracted to the beauty and different things like that. It would seem, again, we try to argue with the fate of beauty that it basically all comes down to beauty. It all has a lot to beauty. And I think this is an example where that is also the case. We do not have frontiers anymore. But that doesn't mean we're doomed once we understand that really what we mean by that is we don't have external sources of new experience in the same way they had in the past. But that means always what did the existential ventilation was a kind of experience. Well, then there's actually a potential hope there.
Exactly.
Because then we can cultivate the abilities to give ourselves that hope. And simply the question is, how does one go about doing that? But there's hope there, I think.
Yes. I think so too. I think so too. And I think too, even from like a very, very geographical perspective, there's actually, if you fly an airplane, you see a lot of land, like a lot of trees, and that's wonderful,
yes.
And I think, obviously there can be some growing threats to that, right. But at the same time, there is so much, there is so many spaces and places, yes. and land, which is great, and those things are still, again, in some ways, uncharted.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And even if just for one's own self, you have that sense again of the mystery. I think that's important.
Well, I think part of it is the feeling that someone has seen these parts of northern Canada.
Right, and that's what I mentioned, right? Like even just knowing that
because then your imagination is not free to fill it with what other splendors you want, right. or to use it as a source of pride where you can be the first one to go. So that's also another element where you can find your identity in being the first to explore, first to see. But, if we take seriously this aesthetic idea, we're talking about the possibility of being the first person to really see that tree in the forest, to really see your backyard, there is a kind of possibility of being the first to really see something, even if we can no longer be the first to see something,
right.
A difference
right.
between really see and see, which will get into aesthetic cultivation and ability.
Right, and I mean... you could only, your own experience of something is really like the only one you can really know for yourself. Yes. You can't know the experience of another the way that you would if you were there, Yeah,
that's right.
You can learn from it, and you should. You should listen to the story that someone tells about their,
of course.
Voyage up Mount Everest or something like that.
Yes.
But it's not ever going to be the same as your own.
No, but that would require an appreciation of the aesthetic per se, your aesthetic experience of Mount Everest. Hearing about Mount Everest is not you experiencing Mount Everest. But again, if it's more of the idea of it's almost like a bad pride of wanting to be the first to know about it. And so you're like, oh, well, they already know about it, so what's the point? Well, because you haven't experienced it. But it's more so the social, there's kind of a hierarchy there, the social standing of, being the first, or, the social standing of going there to make a foundation first. But that's what you're missing. But really, the experience is still a potential there that you have not realized.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a very good point. And I mean, I think, obviously, like, everyone likes to put their flag down and sort of say, like, that they kind of then
conquered it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and have that notoriety. I looked that word up the other day, and I was like, I have not been using that correctly. Like, it's always for something bad. So I don't think putting your flag down is
really?
necessary.
No order? It's always bad?
Notorious.
Oh my gosh.
Notoriety.
They go together.
Well, they're the same.
We're writers, folks.
They're like the same root word, and it's like famous for something bad.
That's really funny.
I use that word.
Hey,
like,
man, people use peruse now to mean like quick reading. It's supposed to mean close, so whatever. It's a contronym or whatever. But no, I mean, a lot of the reasons people say frontiers are dead is because they're like opportunities to be the first are no more.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, it's funny you say about the aesthetic because I think that is so important though to actually have that new experience, like the experience that you're talking about that people are actually after.
Yes.
It was funny when the kids and I were in the forest, like looking around, the leaves were like falling, because it's fall, so some of the leaves were kind of just twirling down to the ground with the wind blowing past. And Haven's like, be very still. Our oldest son, he's like, everyone, please be very quiet. And he just wanted us to take it all in and like look around. It was so sweet. And then he's like, we should make fan art about this. It was so funny.
That's really funny. Well, right there, like, you see, I think one of the things we can do today is now that in some respects, having external frontiers that no one has yet to cross before allows us to escape facing the reality that we've never really looked at anything. And so now we're just no longer allowed to stop convincing ourselves that we've been doing that. The frontiers are gone. And so, once they were there, we could always just keep going and making that our goal.
Right.
And because we were always busy crossing new frontiers, we never had to face the fact that we ourselves have never really seen anything. And now what is happening is we're being forced to realize that we've never seen anything, but we also don't have the training to see. Because we don't have the aesthetic cultivation, we don't have the intrinsic motivation, we don't have the understanding of what beauty is. And so that's what's happening. And the society is in a place where it's forced to admit that that it has never really seen something, but it's also forced to admit that it doesn't know how to do this thing it has never done. So there's an existential tension that develops, and that manifests as the meaning crisis. So what we have to do today, I think the answer to the global commons does get tight, because that's going to be dealing with what is commons is a term. It's like basically the things that are exchanged that you can't really readily just understand in monetary value, common space, common values, and it's not that money is involved, but there's something about commons. I think part of the commons the commons we're going to have to develop is kind of the commons of real sight, like the ability to help one another really see what is in front of them, to help ourselves really see what is in front of us, to really see the world that we're actually in, because there's going to be so many pressures to be abstract on the internet, to be pulled into the internet information world, to just be lost in that one of the great roles of the commons is to not let us go too far into that, is to keep us really seeing the actual and really loving it. Because you see, if you found reality beautiful, you would naturally love it. No one would have to force you to. You would just do it. But that natural, emergent cherishing of the actual will only be the case if you've cultivated the ability to see it as beautiful. And so I think one of the values of the new commons must be cultivating the ability to really see.
Oh yeah, absolutely, Daniel. That's so good, so good, and so spot on. And yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It's like the internet role of, actually, like you said, the role of the internet global community and commons, if you will be to actually orient people to really be where they are, very see what is around them, and so it's almost like this referential it's only going to be work, really, I think, ultimately, if it's always kind of pointing back to each other in a sense.
Well, the value of the internet will be lost if we don't have a dialectical relationship with it.
Exactly.
And the value of the dialectic is throughout all the work and with Cadell and different things. But that requires reality. The only way to have a true dialectic with the internet is to have a actual strong sense of actuality to exist dialectically with the virtual. So therefore, being able to really see the actual, which would necessarily be a prerequisite to being present in it, will be necessary for a dialectical relationship with the internet, so that it doesn't take over entirely, create a new unity, which is always a death drive. Or the other way. I mean, you can have the mistake where you enter a sort of want nothing to do with the internet, and you're looking for your ultimate truth in the actual. But like we've said before, there are good things the internet really brings. The question is the dialectic.
Right, dialectic. And then maybe it's going to be a little bit more like, just have this image of like two fingers, right? Like the internet finger pointing to the real life finger, and the finger real life finger.
Yes.
But I think maybe there's going to have to be a little bit more pointing from the, interestingly enough, because a lot of people's attention is in the internet space, almost more pointing toward
you can have
toward
periods
the actual.
You can have periods of emphasis based on if the society is leaning too much toward one way or the other. Yes. Yeah,
but I mean, it's a beautiful thing, though, that dialectic can exist, and that the two can actually make each other stronger. Then, which is great.
Yes,
it's really, really great.
Oh yeah, it will the actual and the virtual, if we use that language for now. So then, I mean, a question of what will one of the important roles of the commons be? Well, is to keep people actually seeing the actual, to identify the actual, to be able to tell what is actual, and to love it. Which again, it would consider the talk we had about deep fakes and the deep fakes and the fake news and all these different things. It's going to be very hard to know the actual. And so a very important role of the commons will be to teach people to really see, because that's going to be a skill.
Oh yeah.
To be able to tell the difference between the real and the fake is going to be one of the most important and valuable skills that anyone can have. And that's coming, and that exists now, but it's really coming. You know, there's always been in philosophy this sense that if we take Plato's cave, the difference between the world of appearance and the actual world, if we take that interpretation of the cave, that's always been a concern of philosophy. Well, darn, it's really going to be a concern now, and it's becoming increasingly a concern just because information technology so permeates society, and you'll have the metaverse, and you will have deepfakes and all these different things. So again, the idea of community really stressing the need to really see is in fact going to be a survival skill. It's going to be a kind of skill that will determine the difference between life and death, really. And if we understand that in the past, really when they talk about frontiers, they're talking about experiences, then that warrants kind of realizing, okay, well today, we've got to learn how to have new experiences to really see, because that's actually ultimately what was always going on. Yes. But before, they were able to ignore the internal work to develop the ability to really see, because they always could be busy with the new frontiers. But that's not an option for us anymore. And it's it really is going to be a matter of life and death.
Do you think, though, like you just said about ignoring the inner work and exploring the exterior frontiers, I would say, though, I think that's true. I think external frontiers can often be almost just to distract yourself from your internal.
We can do it ourselves with consumerism or different things.
Right, but I mean, I think too, though, some of the people who would be considered frontiers. I mean, I think there's, for those who are fleeing persecution, for those it's funny because to talk about it, it's like we talk about it in like just thinking about people who would literally go and explore territories.
Usually
it's like there's an admiration there in a sense, because it's like that's hard. One, you gave up your land, like two, you're literally risking your life potentially to go.
Oh, sure. Well, if you usually
to some new land and fight off
a few
animals.
Things. Usually, sure. Usually, the individuals themselves doing the actual exploration are indeed full of
exceptional
exceptional
people.
Possibly exceptional
for good
people.
or for bad, but
the society left behind, per se, that is deriving its social organization and identity based on that new frontier.
I think that would be true,
The internal work is not present. But it should also be noted that just because one does the external frontier, it is not necessarily the case
that they don't do the inner work.
That they do the inner work.
That they
Even
don't.
that they necessarily go through the inner work of learning how to really see. There might be a higher likelihood if you're that actual person, but you may not necessarily have to. The issue is today it's increasingly seeming like we necessarily must, because of the blurring of the real and the fake.
Do the inner work.
Yes. It's not becoming so optional anymore.
Exactly. Whereas before it was perhaps more optional, which I think is absolutely true, Daniel. I think it's completely true.
Yes.
Now it's not.
Yeah, I mean, generally society has moved from an external to an internal. I mean, you see it in literature, right? You know, the stories were going off to fight the dragon, and now they're about a day in Dublin, and existential voice, internal workings, the characters, all the different internal voices of the Sound and the Fury, as opposed to a quest. The movement of literature and art is into the internal, because that's where society has gone. It has gone to the internal. Well, now it's really there. Now it's really there. And so much to the fact, I mean, this basically, if we don't learn how to do the inner work, well, then the only option we'll have will be completely virtual, like going off in that direction.
Well, that's a great point, Daniel. That's very true.
Yeah, we won't be able to keep ourselves from going there. I mean, that's just kind of the logical end. Like, if you don't do the inner work, well, there's no such thing as a reality that doesn't have an inner work. So if you don't do the inner work, you can't really be real. So you almost have to. You just almost logically end up going in a completely digital and virtual world. So we have to do the inner work to stay here, per se.
Right.
But if we're just here and ignoring the internet, then we can't also be there and have this dialectical here-there, which I think describes Hegel's absolute knowing, but that's a different topic.
Yeah.
But in order to actually be here, we're going to need to really see it and see beauty in it, to be emergently in wanting to have embeddedness here, because if like a government forces you to do it, if it's by law, well, then it will be oppressive. So that's not the right way to stay in the actual. It has to be according to want, and that means seeing beauty, because beauty naturally cultivates want.
Yes, absolutely, Daniel. I think you're spot on with that, and I think that's true. Absolutely. Well, friends, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you for listening.
You can go to Anchor to get the original reflection. Please go to Dr. Cadell Last's page to see the discussion on the global commons, because it's very, very important, and just getting into the nitty-gritty of the details of the economic organization, the social organization. I mean, those are huge questions and really, really pressing. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time.